name is Connie Surek, and I am the manager of the Brunswick Library. But I am also a tea master from the International Tea Masters Association. So I am here to show you how to brew a proper cup of tea. There are a few things that are very important when you need to brew a cup of tea. Many people think you just boil water and then pour it on top of the tea, which is why many people do not like green tea, is because it will actually burn the tea. There are many different kinds of teas and they are all made differently, and so they need different brewing temperatures. So the water temperature is one of the most important things in brewing a tea. The other thing is your source of water, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then your water, the vessel that you are going to make tea in. So those are a few of the things that are very important when you make a proper cup of tea. The tea all comes from one plant called the Camellia sinensis plant. So it's just one type, and there's different variations, but it's just tea. It's how it's processed that makes the different kinds of tea. So I have a few teas here that I wanted to show you. The first one is, this is a green tea. And you can see that it's actually green. So the way that green tea, and here's another form of green tea. This is actually called green gulu tea. And then the one that I just showed, this is called bancha tea. And bancha tea is kind of like an everyday tea, everyday green tea. So there's different countries that different teas are grown in. Green tea is most especially grown in China and in Japan. Those are the two biggest places that green tea is grown in. And the way green tea is processed is the tea leaves are picked and they are starting to oxidize, and then they are shoved into a very hot stove or oven, and it's called killing the green is the technique that they use. And they have it in there, and then they bring it out, and then and so it stops the oxidation process, which makes it still green. So that is what green tea is. It's a little bit more of a delicate tea. There's some heartier teas, there's some delicate teas. But it's more on the delicate side. So you do not want to boil water and pour it over green tea, because it will burn the tea and it will make a funky taste, which is why a lot of people tend to not like green teas, because they're not making it properly. The other kind of tea that there is, and this is a much more delicate tea, is a white tea. And white tea is tea that's like nothing is done to it. They pluck it and they lay it out to dry, and that's it. And it kind of crumples, and you can see, this is called just an everyday white tea. You could even see how some of it is, there's even like white down on it a little bit too. So that's white tea, and you want a different temperature for that as well, because same thing, boil water and throw it on there and it's gonna totally ruin the tea. Then moving on to that next process of tea is an oolong tea, and there's a grade of tea, or a grade of processing for oolong tea. So one of the ways is you take it and you kind of, you kind of scrunch it up a little bit to get the oxidation process in, and then they throw it in something hot, like a hot oven or whatever, to stop it, and then they pull it out, and they might kind of like shape it a little bit more and then put it back in and let it bake a little bit longer, and then pull it out and shape it. And so however many times they do that depends on whether it's a light oolong tea or a dark oolong tea. And so this is an example of a lighter oolong tea. And a lot of times light oolong tea is usually rolled into little balls. And then when it's in the water, then it unfurls and it kind of opens up and you get the full flavor. This is a darker oxidized tea, oolong tea, and you can see that it's not in balls, but it is kind of like almost like rolled, like the tea leaves were rolled a little bit sideways, if you can see it. So that is going to have a hotter temperature than the oolong tea that's just the greener oolong tea that's kind of rolled up. Then there's black tea. So black tea is fully oxidized. They get it, they kind of mush it a little bit, and then they just let it sit out, and then it'll fully oxidize. This is actually from a tea bag. If you know me at all, you will know that I am not a huge fan of tea bags, but I do enjoy a good, like, British cup of tea. So this is from Yorkshire Gold tea bag. So you could see it's teeny tiny. You can see the teeny tiny granules. And that's called a cut and tear process that they usually use to make it. And usually you can kind of see, and this is where I'll go off on my little tangent, but you can see it almost looks like dust a little bit, and that's what I kind of say a lot of times with the tea bags, is that you kind of get like the end, like the dust of the tea, which is why it's not high quality tea. And then last but never least is an herbal tea. And this is one of my own little like brews. I call it the lemon and lavender tea. So this has lemon verbena, lemongrass, and lavender in it. And any kind of herbal tea is just boil. You just boil it and and throw it on there, and you can leave it sit for 5 minutes. You can let it sit for 10 minutes. It's kind of hard to ruin an herbal tea. So next, I'm going to show you the different ways that we can brew the teas with the different water temperatures and the different tea vessels. So as I mentioned before, the water temperature plays a very important role, and there's a few different ways that you can heat your water. You can have a super fancy-dancy electric tea kettle like I do. It has all kinds of different features here, and I can set the temperature in 5-degree increments to whatever I want it to be. So if I have a green tea that is very light and delicate and I only want it at 160 degrees, then I can program this for 160 degrees. If I want an oolong tea that's 195, I can program an oolong tea for 195, because as I may or may not have mentioned, I am a tea snob and this is very important to me. But water brewing is very important. So if you don't have something like this, or you just go to Target and you just buy the tea kettle that is just a boiling one, you put the water in, you just kind of press the button down and it boils, that's totally fine too. And I will kind of show you a little bit about how to determine what the water temperature can be for that if you don't have a thermometer. Other option is one of your good, and I don't have one, but it's one of your old-fashioned tea kettles that you pour in with water, you set on the stove top, and you let bubble and boil, and it'll, whiz or whistle, and then you can use that as well. If you don't have that, then, and I have done this before, another option is just a saucer. And if you have a thermometer, a pan is what I meant to say. So you can fill it with water, put it on the stovetop, stick this in, and then just kind of see where the water temperature is until you get to where you want, shut it off, and pour it on. And like I said, I have done this before, because you never, ever, ever want to put water in a mug in the microwave. That is a big, big no-no. You don't ever do it. The only time you would ever, ever, ever do it is if you have none of these things and you need a cup of tea. But other than that, never, ever, ever put water in the microwave and microwave it. And the reason for that is that the way the microwave works, it doesn't heat all the water particles up evenly. So even if you were to stir it up, it's still, and it even changes the makeup of the water, so the water doesn't even taste right either when you put it in. So then when you go to brew a cup of tea, then it's just not going to pull the tea flavor out like it should. The other important aspect to water that you want to make sure you do is you don't ever want to use distilled water, because distilled water is already boiled water. And then if you take it and you boil it again, you never want to boil water twice, because again, it will ruin the taste of the water, which will ruin the taste of the tea. So don't use distilled water. You could use spring water if you wanted, or I just use distilled water from my Brita. Or not distilled, filtered water from my Brita. So I just use that, and that works just as well. And don't use tap water, or avoid using tap water if you can. Again, the water just tastes different, which changes the taste of your tea. The other important thing is the vessel that you brew your tea in. So I have a variety of things here that I'll kind of go through real quick. A lot of these things are things you can find anywhere or just order online. But this is a gaiwan, and I don't know if you can see it. So it's like a little saucer, and then it's a little cup, and then it's got a lid to it. And I will show you, I'll brew a tea in this and I will show you how it works. And you put the tea in, you put the water in, and then you leave it brew for however long, whatever kind of tea is in there, and then you kind of move the saucer over, and then you just dump it into the tea. So this is like hardcore, like tea people like to use gaiwans. You really get a good taste of the flavor of the tea when you use this, and it just makes a little bit at a time. Sometimes you don't want a huge mug of tea, you just may want a little bit to actually taste it, and so a gaiwan would be a good one to do for that. There's a couple of different other options. Like this is just a smaller teapot, basic teapot that you have. This is there's a lot of glass teapots that are out there, and this is one of my favorites. This is kind of a takeoff of a teapot called from Japan called a Kyusu. I think it's Kyusu, with the side handle like this. The nice thing about this is that it has a basket, which I really like. And if you note, one of the important aspects of this is look how wide the basket is. So it has plenty of room to put the tea in. And then when the tea starts to brew, it's going to unfoil and open up, and that's what releases the tea flavor. So one thing you don't ever want to use, if you could possibly help it, sometimes you can't help it, or it might be all you have, is one of those tea balls, because you shove a bunch of tea in there and you throw it in, and then it has no room to open, so it's not going to be able to open and unfurl, and you're not going to get any of the flavor. So if you can avoid it, try and don't use a tea ball. Try and find some other ones to use. This is another teapot that's from China. It's called a Yixing teapot. It's made of a special kind of clay that's only from the area of Yixing in China. And the best part about these is that it holds the flavor of the tea. So you want to pick one kind of tea and make it in this, and usually it's an oolong. And so the idea behind it, and this one has a little basket, a lot of them don't. And notice the basket is deeper and wider, so for the tea to kind of move around in. But after so many uses of this, using the teapot, they say that you could just put water in and then just pour it out, and it would taste like the tea that you brew it in. So it's really great. Never, ever wash it. You just rinse it out. Don't ever wash it with soap, because then it will ruin the teapot. Another thing that I use a lot is just your good old-fashioned tea press or coffee press. This is a smaller one. This is just Bodum. So you put the tea leaves in here, and you take this and you put it in. You keep it up, you let it brew, and then when you're done, you just push the water down, or push the tea down. This is an excellent way, because again, you see, like, the tea has all of this room to be able to just open up in, and then you just pour it out, so it's super great. Another one I use is when I'm making tea in a mug, like if I just have a mug for tea, then I will use this. And this is great because, again, see, big, long, so you put a lot of tea in, and then you're able to like stick it in your mug, which I will show you. And you just stick it in your mug, it just sits right on top. And then you got the lid on, so keep it warm. And I'll show you all this when I brew the tea. And then you take the lid off, you strain your tea, and you get to set it right on the lid. So this is one of my favorite little things. And this I had purchased from Teavana, which is no longer around, but you can find stuff like this on Amazon or any other tea shop around. You can find similar things. So those are just a few of the ways that I brew tea. There's other vessels that are out there. You could use a variety. The biggest thing is just remember it needs to be big enough that when you put the tea in, you put the water in, that the tea can unfurl and release the flavor. So our first tea that we're going to brew is a green tea. So the green tea that we're going to brew today is the bancha tea. And so this is kind of what it will look like. The general rule of thumb that you always hear is about a teaspoon of tea per 8 ounces of water. I usually like to do a little bit more than that. I usually kind of do like almost a tablespoon. Because I like my tea a little bit stronger and to have full flavor. You also, as a side note, it's important that I have bought a bunch of these tins from World Market. The way you store tea is also very important. So you take I'll take like a tablespoon. I use this a lot. This is about a tablespoon worth of tea. So I kind of will put this in and just kind of level it out a little bit. And then I'll just dump it right in. General rule of thumb also is that as long as it covers like the base of the teapot, if you get enough tea to cover the base of the teapot, that's also a pretty good way to go with it. So we'll just take this tea then, and then this is about 8 ounces. I think it might be maybe a little more than that, which would be good because it's a little bit more than it's more than a teaspoon. The water was heated up to 165. So green tea. And a lot of it depends on the green tea, and a lot of it just depends on your preference. But green tea is generally heated to anywhere from 160 to 175, 180. And that again is because the tea has not been fully oxidized. It's a little bit more on the delicate side. So you don't want to burn the tea. So that's generally the temperature. I did this at 165. The brewing time is also important. For green tea, you want to brew anywhere between 1 minute and 3 minutes. This is kind of a heartier green tea. So I will probably brew this for about 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes. And then we'll show you what it looks like, what the color looks like and everything when it's finally brewed. So about 2.5 minutes we're up, and you just simply take the lid off, and I'm gonna strain it here. Notice the color. It's like a bright kind of like yellowish green. For this particular tea, you know, that's what you want. This is how green tea is supposed to look. Again, don't get me started on bag teas. Sometimes a lot of people don't like green teas is because they drink bag teas. And again, it's the dust and fannings from the tea from before. So you're not always going to get the full flavor that you would if you were to buy loose leaf tea. You just simply, you know, hold on to the lid and pour it up. And then this is the color of the tea inside the cup. And then usually when you drink tea, you kind of taste it or smell it first. You take a slurping sip. Swish the tea around a little bit, swallow, and then breathe out your nose. So this kind of tea, green tea, usually depending on the tea, but it tends to be a little bit grassy. Some green teas have like an umami flavor, some tends more towards grass. This one has a much more of a grassy note to it. That's like quite refreshing. Green tea to me usually is the perfect tea for spring. Spring and summer, I love to drink green tea. So the next cup of tea we're gonna brew is a white tea, the white tea that I showed you before. And we're gonna do it in a gaiwan this time. Now, when you do tea in a gaiwan, you want to put a lot of tea in there with the temperature of the water, and you brew it for a little bit less because then it could be really, really strong. But notice how I put like a huge clump. I probably filled it about halfway, I think, maybe 20% halfway, or 20-30%. And so there's quite a bit of tea in here, and then I'm going to heat the water to about 185. White tea goes anywhere from 180 to 190. 190 is even kind of can be strong. If it's a heartier white tea, that would work. But usually like 185 is kind of the sweet spot. But again, you can play around and determine like between all of these, like which one, you know, if you like it a little bit stronger or not. I would always recommend that if you like a stronger cup of tea, that you put more tea in versus brewing it longer, because sometimes when you brew it longer, you get that real like brisk flavor that, the bitter flavor that you don't always like from tea. So water is heated and I will pour it in. For this particular, I have a bunch in. I will probably brew this tea for, again, about 2 minutes, I think. If you were to have it a little bit more, if you were to have it in a regular vessel, like the one, like a teapot I just had, you might want to do it for a little bit longer, maybe like 3 minutes, but because it's concentrated in here, I'm probably going to maybe do it for about 2 minutes. Cool. So it's been about 2 minutes, and so we'll pour out the white tea. Like I said, you kind of want to lift it up. You kind of move it over slightly so that you see a little bit of a crack. You're going to hold it like this. This takes a lot of practice. So if you happen to get Ventress and you want to buy one of these, you can, but just don't just spare if it doesn't work right away, because it can be a little tricky. And then you just want to pour the tea into a cup. The best part about a gaiwan, if you're a big tea person, or a snob, as my husband likes to call it, is that you get to see the tea after it's unfoiled. And so that's one of the best things, I think. And then the other part, and a lot of, like Chinese will do this too, is you kind of cup it and smell it. And you can even like, sometimes they'll like waft it in, you know. So this particular tea has kind of like a stone fruit flavor. So like it has a little bit of like a peach or apricot, and there's a subtle sweetness to it that's quite delicious. This is just an everyday white tea. And then this is the cup that it looks like. If you can see it, it's the cup of tea. So it's a very like kind of like a pale yellow gold, little not so green as the other cup was. And so this is going to be like what a white tea should look like when you brew it properly. The next tea that we're going to brew is an oolong tea, which is one of my favorites. I showed you two different kinds of oolongs. I opted to go with the one that was curled up in a little ball, the lighter one, like greener oolong is what we will call it. And so this is kind of, I'm going to use this pot because when I use this pot, those are the kind of oolongs I brew in this pot. So I like to keep it consistent. This is kind of what the tea looks like in here. It's a little dark because it's tea stained. And so you pop it right in here. I'm going to fill the pot up. Probably not all the way. There's a little, like about a tablespoon worth in here, maybe a little over a tablespoon worth of tea in here. So I'm probably going to fill it up, I don't know, maybe most of the way, 3/4 of the way up, I think. Not fully up. The water temperature for an oolong is going to depend on the kind of oolong. So again, if you get a much greener oolong like this one, I brewed this tea at 195. You could do it from 190 and then all the way up to like 200, depending on the oolong. So the darker oolongs, you want to brew it a little bit more, or the water temperature a little bit higher, like at 200 degrees. So this was done at 195. One of the things I wanted to mention too is a lot of the times, like if you're watching this and you're like, yeah, that's great, lady, but I'm not gonna sit here and put all this time into like making tea. I just want to make like a decent cup of tea. That's fine. So there's two techniques that you could do that for if you want. Is you could either boil the water, let it boil, and then let it sit. So if you're going to let it sit to cool off for a little bit, you can do that. And I would say you can maybe, like for an oolong tea, I think if you boiled water and you waited maybe 2 to 3 minutes, you would get about the temperature. You'd get in that range that you would do for an oolong tea. For a white or a green tea, if you boil it and let it sit for maybe about 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, you would get the temperature that you would want for a green tea. So if you kind of want to go that route, like, Lee, I'm not going to sit here and like grab a thermometer and measure or like, you know, take the temperature of my water. That's fine. I totally get it. And so that's a way that you could do it, is by letting the water sit and cool off for a little bit, and you could do it that way. Or you could stop it before it starts. And the way to do that to kind of check is the bubbles. If you ever like watched any, like in a saucepan, or if this is glass, so that's kind of nice, but sometimes you can even open up the top of your electric tea kettle and kind of look. And right when you start to get those little tiny bubbles, you know, they're going to start to rise to the surface, and that you will get, like for the green teas and white teas, you know, you'll get those little teeny tiny ones that'll kind of rise, maybe like a third of them will be kind of on the surface. And then if you do a little bit more like this, like a oolong tea, like a 190, 195, you're going to get a lot more. 200 is where it's almost boiling. You can kind of see it like almost starting to really like ramp up and boil, and you just shut it off and maybe wait a few moments and then pour it. So there's two different ways that you could do that if you don't actually have a way to actually measure or take the temperature of the tea. Those are a couple ways that you could do it as well. So for this oolong tea you generally brew for about 3 to 4 minutes. And I'm probably going to brew this one for about 3 minutes. The nice thing about oolong tea also, many teas you could do this if it's good quality tea, but for a good quality oolong tea, you could brew this about 3 times. And it will taste different each time, so you can kind of play with the way it tastes each time. But that's really nice. So you get a lot more for in your teacup when you actually make an oolong tea and can brew it a few times. So it's been about 3 minutes. So we are going to take a look and see what this looks like. Again, this is like one of the lovely, crazy things about being a certified tea master or a tea lover of any kind, is to actually smell the leaves and take a look at the leaves. So see what I mean? You could tell from the way, let me see if I can find see how they were all real tightly curled from before and see how they opened up. Woo, I'm dripping the water here. You could see how they opened up a little bit because this gives it room to unfurl. So you can actually start to like pick out and see, you know, the big tea leaves and how they opened up a little bit. So this is the oolong tea. I'm gonna pour a little bit in, and this one, greener oolong teas, usually have a lovely floral undertone to it. And so when I smell this, I smell the undertone of like floral notes in this. Usually with a darker oolong, you can still get some floral notes to it, but it has a tendency to go more of like a stone fruit, like a peach or an apricot, like kind of taste to it. It's a little malty sometimes too even. So here, we're gonna brew a little bit. And this is a real pale, I would say kind of like a yellow, like gold infusion. You can see it even smells. Yep, I'm still getting that floral note to it. And so this then is what the oolong tea should look like when you're finished with it. The next tea we are going to brew is just a good old school bagged British black tea. I love this tea on the weekends in the morning. It's my favorite. And I am a Yorkshire Gold fan. I don't know if anybody from Carmen's Anglophile group is watching this or any other Anglophiles that might feel strongly otherwise about another tea. This is my favorite. First thing that we talk about too when we make tea in just a good old-fashioned teapot is it's called warming the pot. So I had just boiled my water. I'm gonna take some and you just pour a little bit in and you wanna heat it up first. So it's a big thing. You really should do it. And kind of get the pot prepped and ready to go. I usually then also will just kind of pour it into my teacup after that to kind of, get it out. You can obviously just dump it in your sink. Rule of thumb for tea bags in a teapot is you want however many people you are serving +1. So if I am making tea for myself, I get 1 tea bag. And if I am, so obviously if I'm making 2 for 2 people, like my husband and I or something, I'd put 2 tea bags in. But if I'm making it for me, I put 1 in for me and 1 for the pot. So since I'm only making tea for myself, I'm not going to fill this pot up all the way. I will probably fill it up maybe like to about here, which is what? Sort of halfway, maybe a little less than that. With black tea, you want to brew it for about, it could be anywhere from like 4 to 5 minutes. There's all different kinds of black tea. I'm just using this just if you're like, yeah, this is great, but I just kind of like, my black tea. But you can get black tea from many areas of the world. And sometimes for some black tea, you don't even boil it. It could go anywhere from 200 degrees to boiling. But most of the time, if you boil water for black tea, you're pretty good. So about 4 to 5 minutes, for brewing a cup of black tea. So it's been about 4 minutes, and we will pour then our black tea. I'm not going to bother taking the tea bags out. You know how to take tea bags out, however you want to get them out, you can. Sometimes you can just leave them in. I know a lot of people that will leave them in and just kind of continue to add water or throw more tea bags in. It's for black tea in a tea bag, sometimes it doesn't matter too much. It's just sometimes it's more about the ceremony of it when you're with friends. This kind of black tea is about one of the very few only teas I would say, like bagged British black tea, would be one of the few teas I would say that you can put milk in. Sometimes you can even put sugar in if you would like. I do enjoy some milk when I make this, so we'll pour it out here. I'm not going to put any milk in, but obviously you can put milk in. You can put a little bit, or I would say any kind of milk, whether it's whole milk or skim milk or whatever you prefer. And then this is just what a basic black tea is going to look like. If you can see it here in the cup. So again, rich caramel color, Obviously, it's not black. Actually, what we call black tea, a lot of times the Chinese will call red tea because it kind of has a reddish tint to it, a red caramel color to it. So at this point, then you could add some milk. You could add a little bit of sugar if you want. Again, the tea snob in me is saying this is the only tea that you should ever add any amount of sugar to, ever. All these other teas, especially if you drink even bagged tea, even if you drink like green bag tea or any other kind of bag tea, the sugar is just going to ruin the taste of the tea. But for a good British black tea, milk and sugar is always a sure bet. And that is then black tea. So the final kind of tea that we are going to brew is just your basic herbal tea. You can buy herbal tea at, any store that, a lot of it will be bagged tea. You can sometimes buy it from like specialty tea places, or a lot of like boutique places will sell it, You can also just make it yourself if you grow herbs in your garden. So this is just stuff from my garden. This is except the lemongrass. This is lemongrass, lemon verbena, and lavender. I call it lemon and lavender. And it's like a spa in a cup. It's fantastic. It's one of those where if you just kind of want to settle in and you have a relaxation day, this is a blend that would be most beneficial for you. Herbal tea, just boil. Boil the water. Don't even have to worry about it. Nothing fancy. Boil water. I boiled this water. I'm doing this in my Bodum tea press or coffee press. I refuse to call it coffee press, tea press. Oh, and as a side note, as I'm on this, don't ever brew tea in anything that you would ever brew coffee in, ever. So whether it's a Keurig, or if you've brewed coffee in this, like you've done a coffee press, and you're like, oh, I'm going to try some tea. Don't. Doesn't matter how many times you wash it. It will still have a flavor. It will ruin the taste of the tea. So don't ever brew tea in anything that you brewed coffee in. My husband rolls his eyes and thinks I'm a big snob, but I'm telling you it's true. It makes a huge difference. I am so much of a snob that I actually have little tea things I take with me on vacation so that I don't have to use the coffee filter where they also say that you can make tea because it just tastes bad. And it's cheap tea. So boiling water on this, I just kind of fill it up. Right about here is where I know is, maybe it's a little bit over 8 ounces. Maybe it's about 9 ounces of tea. I put it in. This is one I use. This is my everyday tea brewing thing right here. A lot of the other stuff is stuff I do like days off or on the weekends, but this every day, every morning, this is what I brew my tea in. So I kind of leave it like that and we'll let it brew. Herbal tea, like I said, I've left it in there for like 10 minutes sometimes. So you could do anywhere 5 to 10 minutes and you're good to go with some herbal tea. All right, it's been about 5 minutes and we're ready. So this is just my favorite because you just press down, it presses all the tea down. And I'm just gonna pour a little bit in here. You can kind of see, this is kind of a pale yellow. This has a bit of a green color to it. Oh, and I could smell it from here. Like the floral of it, the lavender of it, and a little bit of the lemon. Can you see? I don't know if anyone can see. So this is the herbal tea. Like I said, it's like a spa in a cup. One of the things I like to use this for too is it gives you the proper amount of tea because I love mugs. I hoard mugs. I'm a collector of mugs. And so I like a lot of the big ones. And this, sometimes if you put too much water in, you're going to get kind of a bland tasting tea. So this measures the tea perfectly, and then you could put it in a big cup and you're not like filling it all the way up to the top and you've got like the perfect amount. So like I said, this is just a nice like spa in a cup for when you just kind of want a nice relaxing evening or afternoon. And you're all set. And that is it. So I went through all the different kinds of general types of teas that there are and the different brews. If you have any questions about any of this, you can stop by the Brunswick Library and see me anytime. You can also email me if you would like. My email is csurek, CSURECK @mcdl.info. If you have any questions about any of this, I'm happy to talk to you with anybody, as anyone that knows me would know that. But this is the perfect time of year. This is the time of year when we want to get all nice and snuggle in and kind of dig in. Winter's coming, end of fall. And usually what people will say is, oh, I just want to get my comfy clothes and curl up in a blanket with a book and a nice cup of tea. So now you can have a variety of different teas and you know the way to brew them. So I wish you all a very happy fall and holiday season.